All right, we're going to go ahead and get started with today's webinar so we can get through as much of this content as possible before the 1 o'clock hour. So welcome to our first Get Savvy, Grow Your Green Stuff webinar of our annual series. Oh, it's time for class. We do this webinar series every year, and we have been doing it for several years. We've expanded how many partners are coming together and collaborating on this webinar series. But today we are going to focus our attention on Spooked by Spending Plans. So welcome to today's webinar. It is co-hosted by several universities in Illinois, in the state of Illinois, including University of Illinois Extension, which is the outreach arm of the University of Illinois, University of Illinois Student Money Management Center, Columbia College of Chicago, North Park University, Chicago, and Southern Illinois University Salukison. So there's a lot of us collaborating on this webinar series. Today, though, your co-hosts are me, Andrea Pellegrini. I'm the Assistant Director of University Student Financial Services and Cashier Operations, and I run the Student Money Management Center for the entire University of Illinois system. So today I'm in Urbana, yesterday I was in Springfield, and sometimes I'm also in Chicago. And I'm joined today by Floor. Floor, if you want to talk about yourself a little bit.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Floor. I am the coordinator of on-site services in the Student Financial Services Department of Columbia College. I, unlike Andrea, am in downtown Chicago every single day. I'm glad to be here, and I hope everyone has a good time.
Thank you, Floor. So in order to really get you guys familiarized with that chat box, we want to see what state or county you're logging in from today. So I'm in Champaign County in Illinois, but we have marketed this nationally. So in case you're in another state, just let us know what state you're in. So Will County in Illinois, another Champaign County, another Champaign, Miami, Florida, Oregon. Wow, we're all over the place today. This is great. Cook County, great. All right, so we are going to cover a lot of different objectives. We're going to talk about how to create a spending plan as well as what a spending plan is. We're going to talk about different resources you may have access to in income and how that plays a very big role in your spending plan. We're going to talk about a whole different bunch of tracking expenses, different methods of tracking expenses. We're also going to talk about how to prioritize your spending. That's a struggle for a lot of people in a lot of different areas in their lives. And we're also going to talk about how to modify your spending plan to better meet your needs. It's this fluid plan that works with changes in your life. And we want to make sure that you understand when to identify when those changes could mean changes in your plan. So changes in your life could mean changes in your plan. And I am going to hand it over to Floor to talk a little bit more about this.
All right, so to break the ice, because it's kind of chilly over here in Chicago this morning, let's talk about our earliest money memory. Did any of you have like a piggy bank or a container where you saved some money? Did you get an allowance or birthday funds? Let's drop some ideas in the chat, some memories. I don't think I had a piggy bank, now that I think about it. I did. I had a piggy bank. And when I found out I could take the money out before breaking it, I would take the money out from underneath every week to go to the candy store. That's where all my money went. Money for good grades. That's pretty cool. Birthday money, yes. Told no a lot at the grocery store by my parents when asking them to buy candy. Yeah, my parents didn't like to buy me candy either. Well, let's keep the chat going and we'll keep moving forward to talk about the spending plan. So I know we've heard about budgets, spending plans, and there's different like Excel sheets and apps and all these different ways to track your expenses and figure out how to manage your money. So I want everyone to kind of visualize what your plan will look like. Will it be electronic? Will it be on paper? The notepad on your cell phone? We're going to cover some concepts that we're going to explain in the next few slides to give you a better understanding of how the spending plan works. So I mentioned the B word for budget. Some people feel like budget makes you feel restricted, like this piece of paper is telling you what to do with your finances. And sometimes it can be scary or stressful. Essentially, budgets and spending plans are the same thing, but it's shifting the emphasis onto planning to help you be in control of your finances. You're setting your goals, you're saying where your money's going, and you're creating the strategy to be able to get your goals. And you're addressing where your spending goes. So budgets have historically been thought of as a perspective and unforgiving, where the spending plan is more flexible. So just keep that in mind moving forward with this webinar, that you can manipulate your spending plan at any time that your needs and your income changes. So to keep the chat going, what makes a spending plan scary? Are any of you already feeling overwhelmed or kind of freaking out about your income or your debt, especially with student loans or anything? Go ahead and drop it on the chat. I want to see how everyone's feeling today with this topic. All right, so may not have enough to cover expenses. Okay, we are going to cover different ideas for income. Shows me I spend too much. I have that problem too. Holidays, yes. Oh my God, that is so stressful. Definitely. All right. I hope that some of the ideas that come out of this webinar helps everyone alleviate the stress. That's pretty much the goal of today. So keep dropping that in there. We'll keep an eye on it so that we can cover some of those stress factors. All right, so pulling it together, I want everyone to visualize that the spending plan or a budget or whatever term you want to use is kind of like a puzzle. So different pieces fit in different areas. There's not really like an order of creating a spending plan or a budget, but the components that go into it are your savings goals, your income, if you have different forms of income, and then your different expenses. So the purposes of today, our expenses are fixed, flexible, and occasional. And we're gonna be going over what each of those terms means in the next few slides. Now on to Andrea.
Thank you, Flor. So I'm going to talk a little bit about income and resources. And we're including both of these together because you can leverage different resources to help you accomplish your financial goals. So when you think of income, what's the first thing that typically comes to mind? You can answer in the chat. So most people think of income as their wages or their take-home pay. Yeah, definitely their paycheck, money. So there's a lot of different ways to get income. It can be even more complicated if you're a student, because you might get some income from scholarships, or you might get grants, or you might get waivers, and each one of them have different requirements in order to maintain them. You might have student loans, for instance. We'll talk a little bit more about student loans and how they're a tricky sort of income later. You might have child support or alimony, but you also want to consider what resources you have within your community. So as a student, you might have a library on campus. You might have access to public transportation that you don't necessarily get access to without a student ID. For instance, in Urbana, you can just use your student ID to get all over Urbana-Champaign. So that's a really nice resource. In Chicago, you can use your U-Pass if you're part of University of Illinois at Chicago. Flor, I don't know if Columbia College has a contract with.
We do. We have venture cards.
See?
So. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Definitely, you can use all those resources as well. And public transportation is usually a lower cost alternative to owning a car and paying for parking and insurance and maintenance and gas. You might also use food pantries or shelters if you're in a time of transition, or you're experiencing some issues with that particular expense, having an excess need there. You might also consider gifts from family or friends as part of your income, or other types of government assistance like healthcare or SNAP if you're in Illinois, or even the FAFSA. That is a government assistance resource that you could be using to accomplish your educational goals. So, or just think about income and resources more broadly than you might think of it traditionally when you're fleshing out your spending plan. So the thing I really want to emphasize with student loans is that this type of income turns into debt later. So you need to be mindful of that when you're making decisions on how much student loans to take on. And you don't want to put yourself in a position where it's too difficult to complete your degree without student loans. Or you don't want to just avoid student loans altogether and then compromise your ability to accomplish your educational goals. If it's only going to cost you like $5,000 in student loans to complete your degree, it's better to complete your degree than not to do it at all. But it is a type of income that turns into debt later and expense later. So you definitely want to keep that in mind when you are creating your spending plan and considering all of your resources and income available to you. So the other thing that we want to talk about is SMART goals. So when we're setting goals, and you can use the SMART goal acronym for any type of goal, not just financial, but for our financial goals, we definitely want them to be very specific. So if you want a Honda Civic, decide what color, what type of transmission, what year, make it as specific as possible. So a blue 1999 Honda Civic 4-door. If that's what you want, be as specific as possible. That will help you visualize your goal and make you more likely to achieve it. Obviously, it needs to be measurable. So with financial goals, they usually have a particular amount of money you need to save up, or you need to have as a down payment, or you need to have available for whatever your goal is. If you are accomplishing that goal with someone else, or you are using shared resources in order to accomplish a goal, it needs to be agreed upon. So if your parents are helping you to fund your education, for instance, you need to agree upon how that's going to be done and what the goal is going to be. If you're going on vacation with friends, you need to make sure that you agree upon where you're going to go. It's going to cause you a lot of issues in accomplishing that goal if you don't agree upon it. It obviously needs to be realistic. So when Flor was talking about the puzzle pieces that go together, you have to consider all your resources and other expenses or obligations in order to make sure it is realistic. And it needs to have a time stamp on it. So it needs to have a date by which you're going to accomplish that goal so you can turn it into a more achievable goal. So let's talk a little bit about emergency savings as a goal. So this is an important piece of any financial plan, having an emergency savings. And I think that a lot of younger people, a lot of students in particular, find it difficult to have emergency savings, but any small amount is going to help you. There was a study done back in 2016 that found that 44% of adults say they couldn't cover a $400 surprise expense without borrowing money or selling something to pay for it. So who thinks that $400 is a whole lot of money? Most people don't think that. So a lot, $400 right now, yeah, definitely is a lot of money. But any amount that you can save up to that amount can help you overcome a financial hurdle. So just think about that when you're thinking about savings and setting any little bit aside to have that little emergency cushion that can help you overcome a minor emergency, even anything less than a $500 emergency that could drastically impact your financial goals. So I'm going to hand it back over to Floor to talk about timing.
Thanks, Andrea. Yeah, so to go back to the timely piece of the SMART goals, with the savings goals, it really depends on your age and what time frame you're giving yourself. So research has given us an idea of that immediate is more so like within the next few weeks. I know in the chat we talked about stressors regarding holidays and presents and Halloween today and things like that. So for me, I would say immediate for me would be to have funds set aside for presents for my nieces and my parents. Short term would be within the next 5 years. I have a goal to remove the carpet from my condo and put some wood floor. So for me, that would be more of a short term. I would want that done maybe within the next 2 years. Midterm, within 5 to 10 years, in my case, have my student loans paid off would be a midterm for me. And then long term, in my case, I'm 27, so retirement would be for more than 10 years. I want to make sure my retirement funds are intact. If any of you can think of some examples, I know we have people from different places and possibly different ages. So if you can drop in the chat what examples you have for each type of goal, that would be awesome. And while we do that, we'll keep it moving. We're going to talk about understanding your expenses. So we kind of mentioned, fixed, flexible, and occasional expenses, and we're going to go into more detail of what each of those may look like. So here are some examples of some expenses that are pretty typical to have. Under fixed is more of like, this is exactly what it's going to be every month. So in my case, I have mortgage. Some people might have rent to pay every month. If you have a savings goal that you're really, really hard on, that you really want to accomplish, that would be considered another fixed. You want to make sure you're putting $10 every week or whatever. Transportation, if you have like a car payment, I have a car note, so that's fixed. I pay the same amount every month. And then your health insurance. The health insurance piece can vary depending on what kind of health insurance you have, if it goes up or down. But for purposes of this webinar, we'll consider it fixed. But once again, once you start creating your spending plan, it really depends on you. Now, to talk about the flexible, some practitioners consider it a variable, flexible. It's the same concept. This can be food, pet food. I have a bulldog and a terrier. I feed them the same food. But, the price changes if it's on sale. I save myself some money. Utilities can change as well. Right now in Chicago, it's cold, so the heater has to go up. That means my light bill is going to go up. Transportation with repair or maintenance, that can be flexible as well. Or if you take Uber, that can be flexible. If you take it like to work every day. If you're taking meds or you have to buy clothes or toiletries, that's flexible as well. And then if you have a dependent that you take care of, that can vary depending on the schedule or when needed. But to talk about more of like the discretionary or occasional expenses, that's more of like if you want a coffee here and there, or if you said, I'm only going to get coffee on Fridays, or if you have an outing you have with your friends every once in a while. Cable, Netflix, and Hulu can also be occasional unless you have it like contracted and you're really trying to watch Stranger Things. So that can be fixed for the time being. And vacations. Who doesn't love vacation? But that's just to kind of give you an idea. I know that there's way more expenses out in the world. Too much for us to discuss in this webinar today, but this just kind of gives you a foundation of what to think about when you're thinking about expenses. And to track those expenses, these are some ideas we had from research. There's an envelope budgeting tracking tool that you can use. This is kind of like old school. You can put money, like if you get paid cash, you can put it in an envelope, put it under your mattress. I know my parents used to do that. An electronic version of this method is this app called Good Budget. I think we're going to be dropping it in the chat service as well, but this is a pretty useful tracking tool. Another typical tracking tool is to create a spreadsheet. A lot of people use like the Google Drive to create these spreadsheets because it's accessible through your cell phone, and obviously you can manipulate it anytime you have internet. And last but not least, paper and pencil. I think I have all three of these actually. I have a notebook because I'm kind of really into tracking my expenses. But let's keep it moving back to Andrea.
Thank you, Floor. So I am personally very lazy and I use an app. There are lots of different apps out there that you can use. The important thing to look for if you're using an app to track your expenses and to set up your budget or your spending plan is to find features that you need. So some of them you can link your financial accounts, some of them you can't. For instance, Good Budget, you don't link your account. You just, everything is mathematically like if you were doing an envelope budgeting system. You can also set budgets on some apps, or you can set alerts on certain apps. You can, if you have bills due at certain times, you can get alerts there as well. You can also check with your financial institutions. There are some banks or credit unions that have an app that you can track your spending. I use Mint, but there's also one called LearnVest. Different apps have different features. For instance, Mint, since I use it, I'm more familiar with it. I can set up budgets, I can set up alerts, I can pull in all the information from all of my accounts. I can even track what my net worth is and look at different trends over time. There are some apps that you can also transfer money between different accounts. I didn't want that feature, which is why I went with Mint, because it's basically just a dashboard where I can see everything and monitor things that way. If you use an app, or if you like to use multiple tools, put in the chat what you like to use and see if anybody else is using the same thing, or you get new ideas on how you want to track your spending. Whatever you choose to do what works for you. Don't choose Mint because I use it, or don't choose everything because Floor uses everything. Just do what works for you. Okay, let's talk about needs and wants. We are currently doing this webinar during lunchtime. So is pizza a need or a want? Let's talk about that in the chat here. We have a want, lots of wants. A need right now, yes. I'm with Seisha right now. It's lunchtime. Okay, so there's sometimes variation when we ask this question on what people think it is, but there are usually healthier, cheaper things to eat than pizza, so it's usually considered a want. But let's say that you're diabetic and you went on a trip, you didn't plan ahead, and your only option is pizza, and your sugars are dropping. That pizza is now a need. And the reason for this is because we define a need as something that if you went without it, it could jeopardize your health, your safety, or your livelihood. One example that I really like to use is that I didn't always need a smartphone. When I was in college, I didn't need a smartphone. But because it impacts my ability to do my job now, since I travel so much, it impacts my livelihood, my ability to make money and be efficient at my job. So it's now a need to me. But everyone's going to have different needs and wants. So it's important when you're creating your financial plan, when you're creating your spending plan, that you've identified what expenses are absolutely needs for you and what expenses are wants for you. And that will vary depending on where you are in your life, as well as what's most important or what your values are. All right, let's talk about expenses. We talked about fixed, flexible, and occasional earlier, so let's elaborate on that a little bit. So fixed expenses are those types of expenses that are consistent and often are associated with a contract. Flexible expenses are those that vary over time, and they're very helpful to know when you need to identify where you can cut your spending since they're flexible but regular. Occasional expenses show up irregularly over time. They might be bi-monthly or quarterly or just whenever. So for instance, you don't need new tires every month, but that'll be a big expense that pops up occasionally that you can plan for. So we're going to talk about whether or not you think rent or mortgage is fixed, flexible, or occasional. Put in the chat if you think it is fixed, flexible, or occasional. Lots of fixed. I think that one was easy. What about groceries? Groceries, are they fixed, flexible, or occasional? Yes, they are flexible, especially if you do a lot of fresh fruits or vegetables, then that cost can vary depending on whether or not those things are in season or out of season. What about water? I'm going to leave that open to interpretation. Could be utility, could be bottled water, could be whatever. Fixed if utilities, somebody says. Somebody says flexible. Oh, based on usage, yeah. I think it is flexible if you're talking about utilities. It's pretty much flexible in most capacities. Bottled water doesn't always vary, but it could in price. That was a little bit trickier. What about pet care? Is it fixed, flexible, or occasional? This is not a picture of my dog, but it is very cute. We have flexible, occasional, flexible. So pet care, if it may include both flexible and occasional. Flexible being like your treats or toys or food. That's going to be flexible expenses. Occasional might be if there is a medical emergency or for instance, occasional could also be their rabies tags or shots or those kinds of things. So that could be a component. Yes, fixed if you have pet insurance. That's a big thing to help you cover the costs of surprise expenses, healthcare expenses in particular for pets. So that's important to consider. Yep, that. All right, so let's talk about music subscription. Is it fixed, flexible, or occasional? Ta-da! Flexible? We have flexible, fixed. All right, so subscriptions are fixed. But if you are purchasing music over time, like individual songs, that could definitely be flexible. It depends on your individual situation, whether or not you even have a subscription or how frequently that you purchase music. So thanks for participating in that, guys. So the other thing we want to talk a little bit about is spending secrets. There are a lot of surveys out there about love and money. And a lot of those surveys have shown that people hide purchases or how much they spend from people that they love. A lot of divorces have occurred because people hide spending or they avoid money conversations. So that can be a scary part of a spending plan, is having secrets, especially if you have to share that spending plan with someone else or you have to plan together. NIFI has also done a campaign before where they have invited people to share their spending secrets, their spinster secrets even. And we've put a couple links in the chat there to YouTube stories on what people spend their money on and things that they find they spend too much money on. You can look at that later, but it is something to be aware of. identifying what your spending secrets are so you can better address them in your spending plan. And if you need to talk to someone else about creating your spending plan. So that is what we wanted to kind of touch there. Oh, you have a secret PayPal credit line. Well, it's no longer a secret, Floor. Now all of us know about it. All right, so let's talk a little bit about money personalities. This can also be helpful to understand our own money personalities when we're looking at creating a spending plan. There are lots of different personality inventories out there, and the same goes with money personality inventories. We're going to put a link in the chat to the Money Harmony personality quiz, and that's what these 5 money personalities are based on. But there's also a Money Under 35 quiz that we'll put in the chat that compares you to other people under 35 and what their spending habits look like. So you might be an amasser, someone that cares very much about saving a lot of money and making sure to have a lot of money so that they feel secure. You might be a money avoider. Those types of money personalities might avoid talking about or thinking about money or even making a spending plan, and that can sometimes get them into trouble. They might be a money hoarder, which makes it sometimes a little bit difficult for them to let go of money. They might be a money monk, where they sometimes feel that money is a source of evil and that it cannot help them, which can also cause some issues when you're trying to create a spending plan. Or you might be a spender, and if you got it, then you spend it. So understanding which personality you kind of lean more towards can help you in talking about your own money issues or identifying what habits that you'll slip into that might put you off track of accomplishing your goals. All right, so in that chat box that we love so much, let's talk about what your biggest spending secret is. And if you've ever had buyer's remorse. So my biggest spending secret, I'm going to share with you guys. I love clearance clothing racks, and I cannot go anywhere that has one if I don't want to spend money. If I don't have the money to spend on clearance clothes racks, I can't go to Target. It's just terrible. At least I know that that's an issue for me, so I know what to avoid. Some people have issues with shoes, clearance designer clothing. Oh my gosh. I'm not into designer clothing, but I can definitely see where the clearance clothing can get you. Loving Goodwill. Yeah, I can understand that too. It's so cheap there. Of course you want to buy everything. Remorse. Every leash you've bought for your dog. Buying your kid what? Yeah, so a lot of these come from emotional things. So my clearance clothing rack, I grew up in a low-income home, and we only had a set amount of money that we could spend on clothes once a year. So I spent all my money in the clearance clothing rack. So I get a euphoric kind of feeling from that now. Oh, another remorse, buying your Jeep. So there's lots of ways that we get emotional about spending, that we might hide our secrets about spending, and that can impact our plan. So I'm going to hand it back over to Flora to talk about how to create the spending plan now that we've addressed so many different fears and feelings and everything.
Thanks. Yeah, so we've talked about a lot already. So now we're going to discuss more of like actually going in and creating the plan. So putting it all together, again, I want everyone to visualize this more of like a puzzle. What components are needed to create this? There's really not like a clear and concise right or wrong way to do it. It's more of how you're going to manipulate it every time something in your life changes. So again, to go back, we need to identify the priorities. Are your savings goals more of a priority than watching Netflix every weekend or something? You know, like keeping that in mind, analyzing and reprioritizing every single time that you get more income or your income drops or you have a new expense. Tracking your progress is so awesome for like more of like the psychology of things. It makes you feel like you're actually getting somewhere. So that alone keeps you on track. Setting your SMART goals. So going back to what a SMART goal is and how those things function, and then recognizing all your resources and possibly what resources you can include. So you want to make sure you evaluate and brainstorm what your plan should look like. Are you considering doing a paper plan? Are you considering doing an electronic plan? Will you be tracking your expenses on paper? Will you be using Mint? Or will you be like me, where you kind of have like 8,000 things you're using to make sure you're on track? You want to make sure that you kind of have a good idea to start off with before you start your plan. And then the next slide is more of like, again, just kind of different income and expenses that you may have. Once again, we can't include every single type of income. One example I have is that I drive Lyft and Uber. So my income is fixed more so for my Columbia job, but more flexible and possibly occasional when I drive Lyft and Uber. So what I do is that when I do drive Lyft and Uber, I have it set to help me with one of my goals, which right now an immediate one, again, is to buy presents for my nieces. So everything that I'm making in Uber and Lyft, I'm putting away in a savings account to be able to use for presents for Christmas and whatnot. But that's just an example of, you know, a different kind of income and a new expense. So now I'm going to hand it, actually, I'm not handing it back to Andrea yet. To go back to the tools that you can use, I have a notebook that I use for tracking my expenses. And when I get paid, like I got paid today, I go in and I put in how much I got paid, so take home pay. And I start deducting every bill that I'm going to have until I get paid again. And even though I have it on an Excel file as well, I kind of it's kind of therapeutic for me to write it down. So I also use the paper and pencil method. There are apps and software that you can use for this as well. And I think we're going to drop some of those links in the chat. But those are just some ideas that you can use. At Columbia, we use Salt a lot. I actually started my spending plan with Salt. That kind of gave me a good foundation, but I know Andrea has a different method that she's been using as well. But if you have your own, you can feel free to add it in the chat so we can, you know, maybe we haven't heard about it yet. And while we're on the chat, are there ways to save money by spending less? What are you all doing out there to spend less? Can you think of ways to diversify your income? So I drive Uber and Lyft, but I don't know if we have any babysitters out there that maybe babysit during the weekend. I used to babysit when I was in college for my counselor during the week. So what is everyone else doing out there to diversify income? Sell art to get extra income. Yes, that's very popular over here at Columbia too, because we're in art school. So I definitely like that. Used to work at a hotel part-time during the weekend. Yep, I had a waitressing job when I was in college too. Small business, yeah. All right, well, while we keep going on the chat, Andrea, now it's back to you.
So I'd love to see how people are saving more money and diversifying their income. So keep that chat moving. There are lots of ways that you can cut your spending. One of the big ways is to look at all your small purchases. So do you get coffee every day or multiple times a day? Do you eat out, even if it's a small amount? Those small amounts add up over time. We have some resources from University of Illinois Extension that we've dropped in the chat on how small purchases add up. and different ways to save money. Some people find that they spend more money with cash, or they might spend more money with credit cards. Identifying which one you tend to spend more with, and then limiting how much you use that particular form of tender, cash or credit, can help you cut your spending. You also might think about your spending decisions and how long you have to work to pay for that. So for instance, if you find a $20 shirt and you really want that shirt, you might think about how many hours you have to work in order to pay for that particular shirt. So Floor, how long would you have to drive for Uber to pay for a $20 shirt, you think?
Well, let's see. If it's a surge, I would have to do maybe a drive from downtown to O'Hare Airport, which is about an hour. But then I live in Indiana, so I would technically be using like 2 hours, possibly 2.5 hours, because I would drive from O'Hare back to Indiana, but I would only get paid for one of those hours. Yeah.
Yeah, so like that kind of puts into perspective how much work you'd have to put into that particular shirt. So if I was considering an hourly job where I just am looking at how much hourly pay after taxes, I had for, let's say, a minimum wage job, you'd have to work over 2 hours after take home in order to afford a $20 shirt. So think about that when you're looking at different ways to cut your spending. What I sometimes do is, especially for bigger purchases, I consider what other expense is that going to take away from. So if I'm looking at an $80 purchase, that could pay for my cell phone bill or my power bill. Is it worth that? Because I need power and I need my cell phone. So is it worth that to cover that new expense? So that sometimes helps people as well. All right. So a few things to watch for when you are creating your spending plan is if your spending plan results in a negative number. After you've taken your income and subtracted your expenses, you want to be mindful if there's a negative number. You're spending more than what you're bringing home in income. So you either want to make more money, diversify your income, or cut your spending. So definitely tracking your spending can help you identify which areas of those that you can adjust. If you forget to include categories in your spending plan, that can mess you up later. Underestimating costs or overestimating income and resources. When I talk to students about setting up a spending plan, this is where they get messed up the most, because we tend as humans to idealize things. So if we say we're only going to spend $200 on food, but we eat out quite a bit, you're going to easily exceed that $200 budget very quickly. So that's something to be mindful of. And people that work hourly jobs that might get frequent cuts to their hours, you could be overestimating your income if you don't consider that variance, for instance. So definitely be mindful of those things. There can also be variations in your spending and your income from life transitions. Maybe you got a new job. Maybe you started school. Maybe you just graduated. Maybe you had a kid, or maybe you just got a pet. Maybe you're getting married. So all those things can adjust your spending and sometimes your income. The other thing to really pay attention to is if you put those occasional expenses or one-off expenses in the other category, if that other category or miscellaneous spending category gets too big, you want to take a good look at that and see how it might be categorized in your regular spending a little bit better. So definitely look for those. And to come back to what we've been saying throughout this is that this is a puzzle piece. This is a puzzle, and there are different pieces to it. And one of the big pieces is that Reprioritizing your spending plan is an important part of the spending plan process. So your goals can change based on different life stages or different circumstances, and that is a good time to analyze and reprioritize both your goal as well as what your spending plan looks like. And this is a fluid document or thing. So make sure that you are changing it to meet your needs whenever those kinds of things pop up. I also want to remind you that you want to spend less than you earn. I think that we've done a very thorough job of making sure that you guys know to spend less than you earn. Prioritize your saving behaviors to accomplish your SMART goals. You also want to remember that student loans turn into debt later, so you want to minimize student loans as an income source if you can. If you can't, just be mindful of how much that's going to cost you as an expense later, so you're prepared for that, so you're not surprised by it later. You also want to change your plan to match your needs, and you want to track your spending any way that you choose. We want you to choose whatever works for you. This webinar is a spending badge eligible webinar. So we have the University of Illinois oversees a financial literacy digital badges program, and you can earn up to 5 different digital badges to display on LinkedIn or your online portfolio or share on social media, whatever you choose. You just have to complete this little quiz that we're going to put in the chat, if Kendra can hook me up with that, in order to get one step towards the spending badge. And you have to complete 3 spending badge eligible activities in order to earn that badge. And we'll send you progress updates every month on how close you are to winning that badge if you take the quiz. So more and more employers are looking at financial stability as a measure of productivity in the workplace. So we're trying to expand the ways that you can show potential employers your financial savvy by giving you these 5 different badges. All right, so our next webinar is Financial Wellness in First Professions, and it will be on November 29th, also at noon. So if you haven't registered for that, go ahead and register for that. We have that in the chat. Thank you, Kendra. We'll also be sticking around if you have any other questions, but we'll give you our contact information as well, so you can connect with us. University of Illinois Student Money Management Center and Extension are on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and Instagram, so you can connect with all of us there. You can also connect with Southern Illinois University, Columbia College, and North Park University in their respective websites and social media that we've put in the chat there. So thank you so much for participating today. We ended this a little quicker than I thought we were going to do. You guys were so great with participating in the chat. So thank you so much for participating. We will send you an email later this week, most likely Friday, with a link to the recording for this, a link to the slides, a link to the quiz, as well as links to all these different resources that we put in the chat. So Flora and I will stick around for a while and see if you guys have any additional questions, but please feel free to leave if you have other things to do. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone. I hope everyone got something out of this webinar, and we hope to see you